to live by yourself, to live in solitude, to live away from the influence of other people, you either have to be a god or a beast. There's really no in between. Well, I guess you could be a mixture of both. You could become a philosopher. What I mean by that is that most people don't know what their values are. We haven't really thought about them. We're raised, and then we do the right thing by whoever raises us. We do the wrong thing. If you do the right thing, you get rewarded. If you do the wrong thing, you get hit. And so you kind of learn that way. But that doesn't tell you what is really right or wrong. That just tells you something about power. Or that tells you something about what another person values. There's a really good chance that those kinds of values that we're being taught probably are a good thing, and we're probably taught to be loving. Loyalty is a tricky one. Loyalty is a tricky one only because, I find, maybe yours is very different, but I find my experience that loyalty is typically, the people who talk about loyalty the most are usually the people who expect loyalty out of other people towards them, but they're typically not particularly loyal themselves, if that makes sense. They always talk about, you have to be loyal, but they're also the first ones to stab other people in the back. And then even then, if I ask, well, why is loyalty so important? Because a lot of times loyalty comes down to fear as well. I have to be loyal to you. Why? Because I need you to be loyal to me. Why? Because I can't be out here on my own. There's a fear that's there. Because it takes an especially strong personality to be able to be out there by themselves, to live by yourself, to live in solitude, to live away from the influence of other people. You either have to be a god or a beast. There's really no in between. Well, I guess you could be a mixture of both. You could become a philosopher. But largely, you have to be one or the other of those to be in complete solitude away from others, because largely we depend on other people. If you can become the type of a personality who isn't dependent on other people, what you're going to find is that your loyalty doesn't have to be to people, but your loyalty instead can be to values. I was talking to a guy on Saturday night. I was up in Los Angeles. He's a guy who owns several, it's a long story. He owns a jiu-jitsu gym, but he owns 11 of them. And really down to earth. He's from Ecuador, really interesting guy. And he was telling me that he was part of this one organization, because I was asking him how he got his start. And he said that he was part of this one organization, and long story short, one of the instructors raped one of the students. And and several of them were kind of upset about this, obviously. He was from Brazil. And they were trying to figure out what to do next. The organization's idea was, well, it happens, let's cover it up. And he was part of a group of a bunch of people who said, there's no way, no. You can't cover up something like that. You can't pretend something like that didn't happen. And the organization was saying, hey man, you gotta be loyal to the group. And we were talking about how there's loyalty not to groups, not to people, but to values. And if people share those values that you have, well then you can be loyal to them. But you're not loyal to the people themselves. It's because you have this shared value structure. So values would be things like, should you tell the truth, no matter what the cost? Should you be honest, which is different from telling the truth? Hard work, do you reward hard work? Do you reward people, or do you see people as obstacles? So figuring out what's important to you is difficult, and you're going to find that very few people actually do it. Like, for example, if I were to ask you, how many of you have ever sat around and just thought to yourself, what's important to me? If I were to ask you, how many of you have ever sat there and actually thought about what your values are, what's important to you? Why is telling the truth important? Why does that matter? You might say, well, just because lying is wrong. Why, though? Well, because we have a hard time explaining it, except just kind of speaking cliche. But there's a reason that lying is bad. There's a couple of reasons. One of which, because every single human being is important and valuable just by virtue of the fact that you exist. When you lie, you use another person as a tool. In other words, if I wanted to mark on this board, I would use this marker. If I wanted to put a hammer into a piece of wood, I would use the hammer. You're using these things as objects to serve a purpose for yourself. When you lie to a person, you're trying to get something out of them. And so you're using that person as a means to get what you want to get. So you're using a person the same way that you use a marker or a hammer. You're using them, you're degrading them from being a human down to being an object. So now that becomes hard. Because you might say, like, well, what happens if a person, deserves to be lied to? Nobody ever deserves to be lied to then, if it's true that everybody is uniquely valuable and important. So now at that point, we'll start to try to do some gymnastics to make it so that not everybody is equally valuable. But now you got to realize where some terrible roads that can lead you down. Another reason is because when you lie to a person, and we don't really think about this, but you literally change the entire direction and course of their life. There's this reality that exists. Okay, we'll just call this reality. In other words, there's an objective physical universe out there, and there's truth. And yes, there is such thing as truth. We may have difficulty perceiving it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So now, there's a person whose life would be going on this trajectory, but when you lie to them, you change what they actually would do in their life. And so now they're living in an alternate reality, a reality in which they believe that you didn't trash talk them behind their back, or a reality in which, like our parents think that we actually are working hard in school because we tell them that. But we're trying to create an alternate reality because the real reality that exists is too difficult for us. Essentially what we're doing is we're putting ourselves above the actual existence of the universe and saying, I can manipulate it by language, which, by the way, you can. Any of you guys have little nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters, cousins, little tiny kids? You can tell how smart a kid is by how early they start lying to you. I'll let that sink in. You can tell how intelligent a child is by when they start lying. Little kids who learn how to lie, it's because they've understood that they can actually change reality with their words. They ate a cookie, let's say. They shouldn't have eaten a cookie. They knew they were supposed to eat the cookie. They've got chocolate on their face. They just don't realize it. Then you ask them, did you eat a cookie? And they're like, no. They're lying because they realize that with just one word, no, they can change the course of the universe. They can actually bend reality. You might think, like, is it really that deep? This is a deep way of explaining it, but it is that deep. Then they realize, if I just use words, I can keep getting whatever I want. You can't get what you want out of life by force all the time. Very rarely by force, because people will force back. But with words, you can manipulate people, you can trick people. It's one of the reasons that we do this whole language arts thing, because there's nothing in the world that's more akin to a superpower than the ability to use language and use it well. You can actually literally bend reality for people. You can make people believe in something that doesn't exist. And if you can get people to believe in absurdities, you can get them to act in almost any way that you want. You can actually move the world accordingly. So when you lie, you're not just telling, it's just a lie. No, it's actually bending. It's an actual bending of reality. And of course, one of the big problems with it, not the only big problem, but one of the big problems with it is that reality always wins. Reality always turns out. The universe will correct itself. And this is when people get found out. This is one of the reasons, by the way, it's so bad to cheat. It's not just because, the other person trusted you. Yeah. But think about that. It's a person who you're so close with that, like, you knew their favorite color. You knew their, you knew all their intimate details. You knew about what was important to them. You knew what they were afraid of. You knew how they liked their cheeseburger. You knew everything about this person, and you maybe even convinced yourself that you knew this person better than you knew yourself. And all of a sudden, one day, you find they've been cheating on you. It's like, the whole world turns upside down. It makes you question everything that you know. You can't trust this one person who you believed you knew better than anybody else. Then who can you trust? It completely warps your view of reality. Now, it really does beg that question. What else am I missing? What else was going on that I didn't see? And then there'll be these little things all along that you'll say, oh my God, I saw the signs all along. I just didn't trust myself. And now it makes you question whether or not you can ever trust yourself. And it turns people to be into acting angrily, lashing out, doing things they wouldn't normally do to try to get back at them. I'm thinking of somebody right now. I know a friend of mine, her and her husband were close, and they were telling me about a friend of theirs who, in short, they broke up, and the girl decided to get back at him by whoring around. And she was just like, I can't believe she would do that. It's like, oh my God, it's so different from her personality, blah, 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 blah. And then her and her husband broke up, and guess what she's doing right now as we speak? The exact same thing that I would never. Get ready, because you're about to. That tells you that wasn't really a value of hers. But the values are there to guide us, so that when the opportunity to lie shows up, you say, I know it's bending reality, it's bad. It's using a person as a tool, it's bad. And then of course there are people who don't have that value. They just don't care about using people as tools. That's terrible also, because now what does that do for them? It makes them think that everybody's just like them. And so that means that they can never really be loved themselves. They can never accept it. Because we have a tendency to think that everybody's like us. If I lie, it's only because, it's because everybody else lies. So what? Even if that was true. So what? So what? But if you come to believe that, then how can you ever trust a significant other? How can you ever trust a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife? How can you ever trust a business partner? How can you ever trust your friend, your interpersonal friends? If you believe that everybody's always lying, you never can. That means you can never be settled and secure in any relationship, and that's a price that you're going to pay for that. But some of those long-term prices that we don't realize because we don't think very deeply about our values. And that isn't a slam, it isn't a slight. Please understand that. It's not an insult at all. It's just a way of saying, think about your values. Those are the things that guide you. So that when the opportunity to lie or not pops up, you say, no, I have a value, I have a principle, which is I don't lie. I have a value and a principle, which is that I'm honest even with myself. I have a value, a principle such that I work hard. Like I think back to recently I heard that the baseball team, the players here, had to pass like a physical fitness test for their coach. I heard a lot of complaining. Players are complaining, oh my God, he's gonna make us do this, it's terrible. And then it's like, we shouldn't have to do this. It's like, you're athletes, you shouldn't have to be fit. You shouldn't have to be able to, it wasn't super hard either, the test itself. And I think back to when I was playing in college, that our coach routinely would tell us you'd have to do, a bunch of running, whatever. And the coach would say, I have to go, get the running done. And then the coach would leave. We very well could have just stopped right there and been like, he's gone? Okay, let's go home. But no, there was a principle, there was a value, which was we work hard, good things happen. If you short yourself, you short the team. So it wasn't just, I'm gonna stop running because I'm tired or whatever. Is that if you stop, that means that you're not as good as you could be, and the team might need you at some point to be better. And so it wasn't just like this is about me. No, you realize that your behavior impacted the whole squad. These are values, and there are people who have the opposites. So figuring out what your values are, thinking about them, and specifically why. And then that way, when those difficult times come, especially those difficult emotional times, when we're just like frazzled and like we get angry, and so we punch a wall or whatever, we don't do those things anymore. Because we're grounded by principles and values, the things that we can lean on, so that when we are overly emotional, not that emotions are bad, emotions are good, but that when we are overly emotional, we don't have to do the emotional thing. We can rely back on the thing that we thought about in our moments of tranquility. Questions? Comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Something about hoodies that like demand that we put our hands inside them. The marsupial pouches. Anybody have a hoodie that does not have a front pouch and it bugs you? Yeah. And then you ever think about like cutting your own, but then you'll be rubbing your own belly and you don't want to feel like Buddha.